The 1924 discovery of King Tutankhamun's tomb sparked a global obsession with Egypt's ancient treasures. Wealthy adventurers from around the world flocked to the desert, drawn by the promise of fame and fortune in the undiscovered secrets buried beneath the sands. It was this fervent atmosphere in 1925 that Sir Reginald Pembroke commissioned an ambitious expedition to the Valley of the Kings, determined to stake his claim to history. Sir Reginald, an old English aristocrat with a passion for adventure, spared no expense. To ensure the success of his venture, he employed the services of renowned Egyptologist Professor Leon Lincoln Langrissier. Professor Langrissier, with his extensive knowledge and experience, was tasked with validating any finds and ensuring their significance. Alongside them was Roland Cox, an intrepid reporter known for his captivating accounts of exotic locales and daring exploits. Cox's job was to document every step of the journey, bringing the excitement and mystery of the expedition to life for the eager readers back home. With the team assembled and spirits high, the great stone blocking the entrance was hoisted, and they set out into the newly discovered necropolis. The team cautiously stepped into the first corridor of the newly discovered tomb. The air was thick with the scent of dust and antiquity, a silent testament to the centuries that had passed since anyone had last tread these halls. With his scholarly curiosity piqued, Professor Langrissier immediately focused on the intricate wall carvings. He traced the hieroglyphs with a practiced hand, his eyes widening as he deciphered their meaning. The carvings depicted a pharaoh who rejected the afterlife, seeking instead powers beyond the mortal realm. It was an unusual legend, unlike any he had encountered before. Sir Pembroke positioned himself beside the professor, ready to be immortalized in a photograph. Roland Cox, always prepared, framed the shot and captured the moment. The click of the camera was followed by an ominous rumble. The massive stone slab, once hoisted to permit their entry, crashed down with finality. The thunderous crash reverberated through the corridor, sealing them inside. The realization hit them hard. They were trapped. The flickering torchlight seemed to dim as the reality of their predicament sank in. The ancient tomb now held them prisoner. Their journey into the necropolis had only just begun, and already the shadows of the past seemed to reach out to claim them. With the oppressive weight of the stone slab sealing their exit, the team decided to explore the tomb while awaiting rescue. With torches held high, they ventured deeper into the ancient corridors, each step echoing off the stone walls. Deep in the tomb, Langrissier and Cox made a grim discovery. Leaning against a strange altar adorned with a tentacled ankh was the mummified corpse of a German explorer. The desiccated remains suggested he had been there for a decade, a stark reminder of the tomb's dangers. Langrissier inspected the altar, its sinister carvings hinting at forbidden, esoteric rituals. Cox, meanwhile, searched the explorer's tattered clothing, finding a weathered journal and a single stick of dynamite. The dynamite, though a crude and dangerous tool, offered a glimmer of hope, and the professor kept it. As they shared a solemn glance, the reality of their situation became clearer. They were not the first to be trapped within these walls. The tomb was more than a mere burial site. It was a place of ancient power and forbidden secrets. It was then that they heard the sound of a heavy stone sliding against stone. Professor Langrissier and Roland Cox called out to Sir Pembroke, their voices echoing through the ancient corridors, but only silence answered. Anxiety tightened their chests as they stared into the darkness of the previous room, the flickering torchlight unable to penetrate the oppressive blackness. Suddenly, they were answered by a terrifying, guttural roar that reverberated off the walls. Something was hunting them within these cursed halls. Panic took hold, their hearts racing in their chests. The professor, usually so composed, felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. Cox's hand trembled as he tightened his grip on his camera. What was once a silent tomb now pulsed with a malevolent presence. Beyond the annex seemed to hide an unseen danger. Their breaths quickened, and they knew they had to move, to find safety or at least some semblance of it. The ancient necropolis had transformed from a site of archaeological wonder into a nightmare realm where the shadows hid more than just secrets. They hid a predator. With terror driving them, Professor Langrissier and Roland Cox sprinted toward the entryway of the tomb, desperate to escape the unseen horror. Their torches cast dim light ahead, illuminating the path back to their only known exit. As they rounded the corner, their hopes were dashed. Standing in their path was a monstrous figure, a large mummy with the head of a jackal. Its bandaged form radiated a sinister aura, and in one grotesque hand, it dragged the limp body of Sir Reginald Pembroke. The sight stopped them cold. The abomination's eyes glowed with an eerie light. Sir Pembroke's body, lifeless and pale, was a stark contrast to the creature's malevolent vitality. The professor and Cox felt a wave of despair wash over them. The creature's gaze locked onto them, and with a low, guttural growl, it began to advance. The professor and Cox, frozen by the sight before them, could only watch as the abomination tightened its grip on Sir Pembroke's body, dragging him closer with each step. The abomination, a testament to the pharaoh's rejection of the afterlife, embodied the powers that haunted this necropolis. A surge of rage broke through Langrissier's paralyzing fear. With a defiant roar, he lunged at the abomination, aiming to strike it in the torso with a desperate headbutt. The impact was futile. The abomination barely flinched, its ancient form as unyielding as stone. In response, it casually dropped Sir Pembroke's lifeless body and turned its full attention to the professor. With a swift, brutal motion, the creature grabbed Langrissier's arm and twisted. A sickening crack echoed through the tomb as the professor's arm broke, sending waves of agony coursing through his body. Langrissier fell to his knees, clutching his shattered arm, pain and despair mingling in his eyes. The abomination loomed over him. Roland Cox, still standing, felt a paralyzing helplessness as he witnessed his colleague's valiant but ultimately doomed attempt. With the professor writhing in pain and the abomination advancing, Roland Cox knew they only had moments to act. Summoning all of his courage, he dove forward, grabbing the injured Professor Langrissier by the shoulders. With a strength born of desperation, he dragged the professor toward the next room, the flickering torch light barely illuminating their path. The abomination's guttural growl echoed behind them, but Cox pressed on, pulling the professor through the narrow passage. Through the haze of pain and fury, Professor Langrissier's eyes fell upon the dynamite stick he had found earlier. With a grim resolve, he reached for it. Cox, understanding the professor's intent, hesitated for only a heartbeat before holding the torch steady. Langrissier touched the torch to the fuse of the dynamite. Cox's heart pounded in his chest as he watched the fuse inch closer to the explosive. He knew their time was running out. The abomination's shadow loomed at the entrance to the chamber, its eyes glowing with menacing intent. The professor and Cox exchanged a final, knowing glance. The ancient tomb, with all its secrets and terrors, had pushed them to the brink. The fuse burned down quickly, the hissing sound amplifying the tension in the air. Roland Cox and Professor Langrissier braced themselves, knowing there was no turning back. The dynamite exploded with a deafening roar, the shockwave rattling through the ancient stone walls. The blast collapsed the room where the abomination stood, burying the monstrous creature under tons of rubble. Dust and debris filled the air, choking the light from their lanterns. The walls and ceiling of the tomb shuddered, the force of the explosion triggering a catastrophic cave-in. As the dust began to settle, the two men found themselves in a small, confined space. The air was thick with dust, making it difficult to breathe. The realization set in with heavy finality. They were trapped. The explosion had buried the tomb even deeper, and the air inside was already becoming thin. Professor Langrissier, with his shattered arm clutched to his chest, gave a somber glance with Roland Cox. There would be no rescue, no miraculous escape. They were entombed with the very secrets they sought to uncover. As the oxygen dwindled and the darkness closed in, their thoughts turned to the world outside, the friends and the family they would never see again, the discoveries they had made, and the sacrifice they had offered in the face of an unfathomable evil. Sitting against the wall in the growing darkness, Roland Cox lit a cigarette, the small flame briefly illuminating their weary faces. Professor Langrissier could only muse about how he wished he had a gun to face their final moments with some semblance of defense. Roland exhaled slowly, the smoke curling up into the dark, and quietly replied,
"Yeah, I left mine in the tent."
In their last moments, as the air grew colder and their breaths grew shallower, they shared a fleeting sense of camaraderie and resignation. The tomb had become their final resting place.